Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
On today's program, we are doing program number 2 in a rather long series that's titled Confronting Hate, Humanity's Greatest Challenge. We have had a symposium at North Idaho College and Gonzaga University that has brought all these speakers to our 2 campuses, and we thought that you would really like to hear and examine these very important ideas. On program number 2, I'm so proud to welcome to the program my very good friend, Dr. Raymond Reyes, who is the Associate Vice President for Diversity at Gonzaga University in Spokane. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Eastern Washington University and a master's degree in public administration from City University of New York. He has also recently received his PhD in leadership studies from Gonzaga University. Our guest is the past Chief Administrative Officer for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe and was the Administrative Officer for the American Indian Community Center in Spokane. He has also taught for more than 20 years or has that experience in Indian education. Raymond, it's always great to see you, and we are going to particularly examine today on the program spirituality as an antidote to hate, and you are such a wonderful, wonderful example of that, and thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who holds a law degree in Idaho, and next to her is our new panelist, who was with us last week, Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Janelle will ask the first question today.
Dr. Reyes, we've had the privilege of talking before, but I want to start today's program with asking a rather direct question, and that is, do some people use God as a means of promoting hate as well as promoting love?
Oh, definitely. God, like a tool, can be used as something for construction as well as destruction. So that's precisely true. I mean, the double seed theology hypothesis is precisely that, where you're using the Word of God to justify, rationalize sins of omission, sins of commission, the nature of hate. So that's very, very true.
And we see that with religions throughout the world. Is that correct?
Every religious institution has a fringe element to it, an extremist end that interprets their theology in a different way that ends up hurting other people. So that's true. It's an equal opportunity phenomena, unfortunately.
But the real truth of the matter is, if people are looking at it properly, they would be looking at it from the love perspective.
Well, I'm a God junkie. I mean, I've spent a lot of my years studying and researching different religions from all over the world, organized as well as what I'll call more esoteric spiritual traditions. And I think that it's safe to say that there is common ground, and that common ground is all these religious traditions have a couple of things in common. One of them is the emphasis on love and service, that there is that strong grounding, that it is about learning how to love, and also what do you do with that love, and the second piece is service. So that's true.
Erna Reinhardt.
Raymond, I know that you're very intimately involved with the leadership program at Gonzaga, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how this whole concept about spirituality is involved with leadership.
Okay. Well, I think I appreciate this forum this past week, because what it does is it speaks to hate. And as Father Spitzer did earlier this week, he looked at the phenomenology of hate as a way to understand the epistemology of hate, looking at love, and then, that a desert is defined by the absence of water. When I look at leadership, I see leadership as a place that has to be grounded from the heart center and from spirit. Not religious constructs, but your faith formation, your relationship to something transcendent other than yourself. And because truly you have to ask why be a leader? And hopefully it has to do with the common good. It has to do with creating an opportunity for others to optimize their potential. It's about activating and leveraging the talents, gifts, abilities, and blessings of others, and that you create the context, you create the conditions by which those sorts of things can be nurtured, sustained, and supported. And to me, that is what leadership is about, and that is the spirit of leadership. Leadership for what? And Robert Greenleaf and others have done a lot in the area of what's called servant leadership or trustee leadership, that is grounded in the notion of altruism, a sense of community, doing things, as Father Spitzer talks about, with respect to the common good. And to me, that is the hallmark of spirituality that leadership is about in that venue.
I'm going to take you back to just before we started taping the program today, and you had it on a continuum, really. So we were talking about hate here and love over here and apathy in between. Just kind of take us across that continuum and how people change depending on where they are on that.
Well, I think hate and love are emotions. They're human emotions. And I mean, if the issue of human difference was logic and reason, we wouldn't have any trouble. I mean, you could solve it logically and rationally, but obviously it's imbued with human feeling. And as such, I often think about the journey the last 40 years, and where we talk about tolerance, and we've talked about celebrating diversity. And I've often wondered on a continuum of human emotion where those things are located. And recently was working with somebody that suggested a perspective that I'd never considered. And on one end of the continuum is hate, on the opposite end is love, in the middle is apathy. And what she contended was just to the right of hate is tolerance. And her argument was, in essence, that we tolerate a root canal or a spinal tap, but the integrity of another human being, I think, demands more than this tolerance, demands obviously respect and love, and that was her argument. And then right to the right of apathy, her contention was that that's where we celebrate diversity, where it becomes a kind of a cheerleading type activity, which is not a pejorative. I mean, that's important and essential in community development. If you're going to develop a multicultural community in a democratic society, it's important that we draw our circle larger and we're celebratory with who is inside the circle. But something that's fascinating is just to the left of love is her notion of supporting and nurturing and encouraging being different, authenticating our personhood by virtue of who we are, to know the other through God's eyes, to see people as mysteries, as Father Spitzer indicated earlier this week, to see people as mysteries and not problems, to see the good news in others. And to me, that's what a leader does, that is grounded and formed by their faith life, that transcendent a theological bent. They take who they are, their personhood, and articulate that in lived experience so the other can be empowered to optimize their full potential and be who they truly are. So this is about authenticity. And it's not about wearing other people's faces as our mask, but and it's not about being politically correct. It's using relationship as the living curriculum to spiritualize our consciousness. Consciousness is, the twin pillars of consciousness is attitude and attention. Where do we put our attitude? Where do we put our attention? And with what type of energy do we imbue those two principles with respect to this thing called human consciousness? So there's a real practical, tangible dimension to what we talk about when we use words like spirituality or consciousness. They're not esoteric in the sense of the effect that they have in people in daily life.
And one final point before we go back to the panel, and that is that if you can do that, what you're speaking to, and also Father Spitzer, the president of Gonzaga University, spoke to, that if you have, and it takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of temptations to not do that at times when things are very negative, but if you can capture that in the proper way, it really can impact a person that is being negative toward you in a very positive way. I mean, it's very powerful, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Well, because how you react, I always have this sense, and it's a series of presuppositions that I have with the notion that, quite simply, God is love. And if you experience love, you know God. But backing up a little bit, it has to do with being able to act on your feelings, not act them out. And being able to understand that our emotional life is our spiritual report card. Our emotional life is our spiritual report card. And so whenever we are in, as Arnold Mindell would say, sitting in the fire, How can we creatively and constructively use human conflict as a transformative moment? How can we do that? And typically the reaction is negative. But if we can step back a little bit and self-correct and listen to our metacognition or self-talk and take inventory and be vigilant to those feelings that are a wake-up call and says, okay, here's an opportunity to interact differently with this person. They expect me to be argumentative and combative and negative. How without being condescending and truly meaningful to this moment, how can I act differently? And you hit it precisely right. And I think that to do that is to draw your circle larger. To do that is what Anthony DeMello says all human beings have difficulty doing, and that is to include the excluded, respond to hate with love, and admit you're wrong when you're wrong. I think it's an intellectual humility when we, through in the heat of the moment, if we are wrong, to admit that we're not related to the Pope, we're not infallible. And so go ahead and do your mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. And as Desmond Tutu said, there is no future without forgiveness. And so it's okay to reveal your vulnerabilities and your Achilles heel, and I think with the hope and promise that the other person will engage in that life space also in an authentic way and pull down their armor in their vindictiveness or their hate or their anger. And understand that beneath all that hate and anger is a woundedness. There is a history there, and they're exemplifying that history to you. Mm-hmm. And you don't honor their life force by in this case, putting a fire out with gasoline. Sure. Just inflame the situation even more.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I want to ask more about the servanthood, the servanthood that you envision, because I think that's a growth that comes out of the love. Is that correct? Is that how you would see it?
Well, I think...
Or does servanthood create love?
I think we're hardwired for God. And part of that spiritual DNA, if I can use that metaphor, is the caring ethic. I think the first act of love is a sense of empathy or caring. And so to care is to invite the promise of love. You're knocking at the door of love. Mm-hmm. And then when the caring occurs, there's the empathy. Caring is an aspect of empathy. So with servant leadership, it goes back to values. What do you care about? What's important? What are you vigilant to? What are you willing to do, like those Cheyenne dog soldiers? Not only live for, but to die for. What are you willing? What do you value? What is the beloved in your life? And what are you willing to? What do you stand for? And then based on that, be able to care about persons, places, and things that are consistent with that ethical moral compass. To me, that is the basis of servant leadership.
So you're saying that servanthood expands beyond just people?
Oh, definitely. I believe in Martin Luther King's notion of the beloved community, and that his grounding of the beloved community had a spiritual, social, and strategic dimension to it. And as such, he looked at self-love as the alpha point for addressing hate, and that it had to do relationship to self and others as a multicultural being. It had the relationship to self and others as a spiritual being, and then relationship of self to the environment. So you have the notion of sacred place in Thomas Berry's notion of deep ecology, and that the earth is subject, not object, and that all life has just as much right to have voice as anybody else with two legs. And so you're precisely right when you pick up on the notion of person, place, and thing.
I don't know.
As a parent, I'm always thinking about how we can better be parents or be better parents. So I'm wondering, I'm real interested in hearing, Raymond, how you would convey some of these ideas and philosophies that you have with our children, because I think if you look at our society, it seems like we're getting further and further and further away from some of those core values that are so important. And if there's something that we can do as parents to bring back that sense of some of the things you've been talking about, that'd be wonderful.
I think children intrinsically are drawn to a good story. And I think stories are a way to, as the Ignatian mysticists often describe and declare, the heart liberates the mind liberates the heart. And it is in story, in narrative expression, that children are able to integrate what the lesson is. Let me give you an example very quickly, because we were talking about caring earlier. There was a lady by the name of Carol Gilligan, who is a psychologist, and years ago wanted to develop a theory on moral development, because all the theorists up to that point were male, and the field in terms of moral development theory was dominated by men, and really failed to take into account gender differences with respect to moral development. And in some cases, some of the theories actually appeared to portray women as lesser than men. And so what she did is she wanted to demonstrate that there were quantitative and qualitative differences between males and females with respect to moral and ethical development. And so what she did is that she took a group of 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, male and females, and she told a series of stories from different cultural groups. And the stories were moral dilemmas that she wanted them to solve. And just very quickly, in the interest of time, one of them had to do with a story of a gopher and a porcupine. And so she told the girls and the boys the same story, and says, well, what would you do? And the story went like this, that it was wintertime, it was cold, and it was dark, and there was this hole in the Earth Mother that was their lodge. And Porcupine was in there with these gophers. And every time Porcupine moved, it poked one of the gophers, with his quills, right? Just move and move like this. And there wasn't enough room, and so everybody's getting pricked and everything. He says, well, what would you do? Well, the boys, they'd say, kick the porcupine out, cut the porcupine's quills. Most of their strategies for resolving the dilemma had to do with extraction, removal, sound familiar, relocation, or had to do with modification to a normative standard, make them look like us. The females said things like, well, we could build another house for Porcupine. And then some of the girls would say, but then Porcupine would be lonely. And well, we could take turns visiting, and they were accommodating. They were inclusive and accommodating. So, to me, parenting, in Yiddish, the word parent means first teacher. And they have what it takes. What we need to do is find the on switch and then create multiple diverse opportunities for them to practice these ideas of caring, of compassion, of empathy, of respect, that those words become living, real manifestations of behavior, and that in that behavior, a behavior that's affirmed and reinforced becomes habituated. And to me, that is what good parenting is about.
I have a great friend named Norm Gissel, who is an attorney in our Human Rights Task Force Board, and we talk a lot about culture and dealing with human rights issues and dealing with hate. And as we deal with hate, and certainly you, and again, we keep referring to President Spitzer's comments too in his formal address, we analyze, and you see this in behavior. We saw that here a couple of times this week, where someone was so angry,
yes,
and they were so afraid and fear, that they were acting that out in a very, very concrete, specific way of hate. As Father Spitzer, Dr. Spitzer said, that going from the individual to your interpersonal friends to convince them, and to move on beyond that to the communal or the community to convince them, and then into the culture,
Society,
which society is really, really great. I want you to give some advice to communities in our area. As my friend Norm Gissel says, that when a person or organization chooses to work in a community to promote hate, to campaign for it, to take that choice over
right.
love,
Yes.
they choose certain communities and not others.
Right.
As he often says, they don't go to Sweden. They don't go to San Francisco.
That's right.
They go to some community. So give advice to our communities that to choose love means also a community must do certain things to be the antidote to hate, so that it won't grow in your community. Or those who wish to promote that choice may not choose your community.
I think it goes back to your earlier reference regarding the use of religion and theology to justify hate. And I believe that it's important to, and this is difficult, be patient with people to a point. But then what you've demonstrated in this community is precisely what needs to be done, is how you say something becomes what. You don't tolerate it. You draw the line in the sand, and you basically create normative standards or community standards of behavior and what's expected. And you don't tolerate anything less than that. And when it happens, here again, how becomes what? You don't, as Pablo Freire and what Michael Burke talked about in his keynote yesterday afternoon, was avoid the seduction of the oppressed becoming the oppressor. That we have an opportunity, as he's indicated, between humanizing and dehumanizing, and not demonizing the other because of their negativity, because of their acidic, poisonous state of consciousness. But make this other way of being contagious, and it becomes a preferred option. But I think it's creating the conditions and not allowing that, and I'll say, using a botanical metaphor, that weed to germinate and thrive in this garden we call the Coeur d'Alene community. And but on the other hand, to think, and I'm going to talk about this tonight, is that rain falls on sinners and saints alike. In this room here, the lights are not going to say, I'm only going to share my light with the good people in the room, and I'm going to remove it from the evil people in the room. See, so that is really what we're called to do, this thing called unconditional love. And I think it's being stubborn and relentless and persistent. As William Blake, the poet, said, what you resist, persist. Continue, continue, continue. And it's a marathon. It's not a 100-yard dash. I mean, the shelf life is eternal. And it is the drama of why we're here on this planet. What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a human being?
I've often described it, you have to be the tortoise rather than the hare. It's a slow journey, but you don't get off in the briar patch.
That's right.
Janelle Burke.
Following along that, I want to ask you about the enrichment of life, the unconditional love that enriches life. How does it do that? And give us some examples of how life is enriched by just being unconditional about your love for someone else.
It's the attitude of gratitude. It's what Parker Palmer describes as enjoy the rapture of being alive. It is about what would you miss? What would you miss? Well, Raymond would miss the when I go outside, the wind on my cheeks. I would miss a juicy, sweet, cold peach in the heat of the summer. You know, what are you grateful for? What are the simple pleasures of life that we're grateful for in that sense? Not to sound narcissistic or self-absorbed, but certainly gratitude begins with a sensitivity and a sensibility of what you have that brings joy in your life, to have fun, to have joy, to be like our children. The children have a natural propensity for frolicking, for just allowing their life to have revelation and have fun with it. And I think as adults, we get that socialized out of us. And certainly the work ethic in this country is such that work and then play, you know, and that with labor-saving devices, we've just gotten taking crazy making to a new level of being. I mean, multitasking to a new level of crazy making. Cell phones and the internet and all, you know, microwaves, all the technology that we have are supposed to be labor-saving devices. No, we live 3 lifetimes in 1 lifetime. So I think that, you know, I think Alpha Point, in terms of activating a sense of spirit, a passion for life, is being grateful for the obvious, for the things that we take for granted, the things that many times we're autistic to, we're blind to, we don't hear, we don't see. When you hang out with a 2 or 3-year-old and you go for a walk, a short distance, they see things that we do not see. And it's, I guess my response would be to see life through their eyes, and in doing so, understand that we're loved.
Erna Reinhardt.
I'm taken away. This is wonderful. It's a great topic.
She paused like that.
I'm trying to think of a good question. How would you encourage people to get off that fast track and stop to appreciate more of the things in life, right? You know, I know that you've got the wonderful program at Gonzaga, but for those of us that aren't in that program, what kinds of things can we do as individuals to bring that inner peace? And
well, it goes back to spirituality, and I think one of the hallmarks of a spiritual life is to have a spiritual discipline. And I use the word discipline in the liberation sense, that whether it's prayer or meditation or contemplation or running or going for a walk, whatever gets you in daily contact with the sacred is I'll say necessary as food and water and everything else. And if we could adopt that attitude and say that I brush my teeth in the morning, I have a certain protocol that I go through to fulfill and sustain my carbon-based unit in my body, and that I'm a spirit in an earth body, and by gosh, I better have some good hygiene and some good prevention in terms of my spiritual health and wellness. And what are you doing for that in terms of your ceremonial life, in terms of your religious contemplative life? What are we doing there? And to me, that is the beginning. To even if it's 5 or 10 minutes every morning or before you go to bed at night. So there's that. The second thing is to slow down long enough to sit at the feet of your own life and learn from it. We are our own gurus. Our God enacts, he, she, it enacts the living curriculum by which we can spiritualize our consciousness every day. If we only slow down and use the power of reflection. I've been fortunate to work at Gonzaga University for 15 years, and one of the things I've appreciated about the Society of Jesus, the Black Robes, is their emphasis on reflection, being able to slow down and use two powers, the power of context, our lived experience, and then reflect on it. What does this mean? What do I do with this meaning making? Because we are naturally wired to sense make and meaning make as human beings, but we need to slow down to reflect.
Bad news, we're out of time.
Okay.
I wish we had more time. Dr. Raymond Reyes, who's the Associate Vice President for Diversity at Gonzaga University, has been discussing with us over this overall topic, confronting hate and combating it, and dealing with spirituality. We'll continue this series again next week with another guest as we continue down that road. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.